cat. What a weird-looking thing. Let me get a picture before you track up the whole place.
This Geiger counter's going crazy.
Something smell of that surface crust that's frozen over again into clear ice.
The bottle shape apparently was caused by the aircraft first making contact with the Earth out there at the neck of the bottle, sliding toward us and forming that larger area as it came to rest.
With the engine or engines generating enough heat to melt that path through the crust, then sink beneath the surface.
What could melt that much ice? Let's go down and see. Barnes?
Okay, retro, go. Fire, go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies and specifically talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 293. And our movie this week is 1951's The Thing from Another World. And here to talk with me about it, because he had not seen it, so we're fixing that, from the Botched Podcast, it's he who is Steve. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back again. I'm super excited to talk about this one and maybe a little something extra at the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have heard about this movie for forever in the context of other things, pun intended, and I've never seen it up until a couple days ago. And I tell you what, it's not quite what everybody says it isn't.
Yeah. So first question is John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. You've seen that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of my favorite movies of all time. Absolutely. Got a poster of it in my kitchen. Excellent.
It is one of my favorites too. It is just an amazing horror film. So you'd seen that. Were you aware, or when were you aware that was a quote unquote remake of an older film?
I can't say when I was made aware of it. It was probably pretty soon after I saw it. Okay. That somebody said it was a remake. Mm-hmm. And I carried that with me for a long time before I figured out that wasn't quite the whole truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So The Thing is a quote unquote remake of The Thing from Another World, which itself was adapting a novella called Who Goes There? The cool thing about Carpenter's The Thing is that he grew up as a huge fan of this movie, The Thing from Another World. He loved it.
No kidding.
He actually, in Halloween, the movie that Lori and Tommy are watching is The Thing from Another World. The thing it's playing on the TV. And so he's doing that. And then a few years later, he's making the movie. And I was actually listening to an interview with Carpenter about The Thing from Another World. And one of the things he said was The Thing was his first studio film. So he had done Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13, and then he makes Halloween and blows up and is in demand. He makes The Fog, and the first studio film he got was The Thing, and it was one of those where the studio signed him to a contract and then came to him and said, "Hey, we've got the rights for Who Goes There. We want to remake The Thing from Another World. We want you to do it." And he said in the interview, I didn't really want to, it wasn't like a huge passion thing for me, but at the same time, I couldn't pass up remaking Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World. So I went for it. But then he did the smart thing, I think, and decided I'm not just going to remake that movie though, because that movie was very much a product of its time. I'm going to do my own thing with it, which I think we're going to dive into a lot more as we get going. But when you say that this wasn't what people had told you it was, I think is how you worded that, or maybe however you worded that. What exactly do you mean by that? Like, how was this movie sort of brought up to you, The Thing from Another World?
So, like I said, originally people told me that 1982 The Thing was a remake of this movie. Okay. And I feel like that's a really that's a misuse of the word remake. They are both adaptations of the same source material, and they go in two different directions. And I don't think they take a whole lot, if anything at all. 1982's The Thing doesn't take a whole lot, if anything, from this movie, and anything that it does take is probably from the original, probably from the short story. But what I had heard for the longest time was that the Thing from Another World is basically an adaptation in name only of Who Goes There. It uses the thing, and there's a thing, and that's basically it. And after reading Who Goes There, which I also read Who Goes There for the first time this weekend, I think that's not giving it enough credit. Because while it did make some pretty major changes, it actually holds on to some thematic elements from the short story that the 1982 thing does away with.
Yeah.
Which I found really interesting.
Yeah. And the 82 thing, I think, holds on to some thematic elements that this movie did away with.
Absolutely.
But, so the novella gets published in 1938. Who Goes There? And it's pretty good, actually. It's an interesting little sci-fi story. It's very, in fact, there was some rumblings at some point, I don't remember when, that it's very similar to At the Mountains of Madness, a Lovecraft story.
Yes.
And
there's a lot of similar language.
Yeah.
And a lot of the similar feeling of isolation there.
Yeah, and I think At the Mountains of Madness was 36, so it was maybe a year or two earlier. So they're right around that same time. It's not uncommon for stuff like that to happen. Either he read it and took some inspiration from it, or there was just something common between the two that sort of bore both. But 38, it comes out. Howard Hawks reads it in 1949, I think he said. He was working on a movie and happened to pick it up at the PX exchange and read it and loved it. And so he wanted to make it. And he hadn't done sci-fi at all. This was the only sci-fi movie Howard Hawks ever made.
Ever? He never did another one after this?
Apparently not, from what I read.
Wow.
So he gets the opportunity to do this, and there's debate over whether or not he directed this. Because the credited director in the movie is Christian Nyby, and he did go on to direct more movies. He had been an editor for Hawks, and as the story goes, he had edited a bunch of stuff, and Hawks owed him, and so he basically cashed in that favor by saying, "Well, I want to be a director, so let me direct this." And Hawks was like, "Fine," but you got the main actor Kenneth Tobey, who played Captain Patrick Hendry, basically saying, "No, Howard Hawks directed the movie." And then you've got James Arness, who's the guy in the Thing suit that they use, saying, no, it was Christian Nyby. And it kind of goes both directions. I think there was a lot of kind of cross-pollination going on. Howard Hawks is the producer, so he has some say in it. It was his production company, Winchester Films, that put it out through RKO Pictures, which that was cool. I loved when this movie started up, and you got the big RKO radio pictures and the radio tower and all that. Like, that took me back, because that's just, you just don't see that anymore.
It's classic now.
Unless it's being done as a shtick. But like, that was
RKO did that. Universal did that with the plane flying around and everything. They just don't do that anymore. You mentioned real quick before I forget. You mentioned James Arness. I was blown away to learn that was James Arness in that suit. Right. If you don't know, my mother was a huge fan of Gunsmoke.
Right. Yeah.
And he played Matt Dillon in Gunsmoke for 20 years.
Yeah.
And he played the Thing from, like, you can't see his face. He's all prosthetic. It's a Boris Karloff job. And it's wild. It's the same actor.
And what's funny is, one, he hated this. Like, he didn't go to the premiere of the movie because he felt embarrassed by it, because he just felt like they made me look like a big carrot, which is really funny for him to say that. But the other funny thing is, I love that you mention how it's just a big Boris Karloff Frankenstein look, because Howard Hawks, of course, is producing this. Well, one of the financiers for it was Howard Hughes, who put up some of the money for it. And Howard Hughes had said, "Look, it's fine. You got a big monster, whatever. Don't make it Frankenstein." And Howard Hawks tells him, "Don't worry, we're totally not going to do that." And then they spend like a month and a half or 2 months trying to come up with their creature. And he ends up just telling the special effects guy, "Just make a Frankenstein. We'll just go with that." Because that was one of the major changes that they made in adapting Who Goes There for this movie, was the creature is not a shapeshifter. And it was in the novella. And it really just came down to, they couldn't do that. They just did not have the technology or the budget to do any kind of shape-shifting creature.
Sure.
I think it's described in the novella. How is it? It's like blue skin and three red eyes or something.
3 red eyes, blue skin, and it has like worms for hair.
Yeah,
that
right.
move even in the ice.
That's creepy. And they basically kind of figured out early on, like, okay, we can't do that, so we're going to go in a different direction, which is fine. And I actually don't have a problem with that. For the purposes of this movie, I kind of liked the change they made where they made the creature plant. It was a plant.
Yeah. Well, and that was part of what was very interesting to learn reading the short story Who Goes There. Was there is a discussion in about the first quarter of that book where they've dug up the thing and they're talking about melting or thawing him to get, to examine him. Blair, who you'll remember is a biologist from the 1982 adaptation, very similar role here.
Yep.
And he's talking about how completely alien this is, that we don't know anything about it at all. It can function completely differently. You don't know anything about this at all. And he's argued with other characters about it. And that was something that's really kind of not in the 1982 movie at all. There's no real discussions about the complete alien nature, that we don't know anything about it, that we don't understand it. And it's almost the whole focus of the nature of the monster. The paranoia of the shape-shifting is done away with, but the complete alien nature and unknowable nature of something from the beyond is kind of the central horror element of this monster.
Yep. Yeah, that, and then of course the scientist in their never-ending search for knowledge.
Yes.
At all costs is the kind of the other part of it, which you sort of get in the 82 movie, but not really.
Not as much,
in the same way, in part because it's so scaled down, right? Like this movie, they did switch the setting to the Arctic for this, and Alaska. And I think that's just a logistical thing. It was just easier for them to signpost something. Although this is another great production thing. So they shot a bunch of the exterior shots in Montana, I think it was.
Okay.
And they'd found a place that supposedly got, according to the weather reports, an average of like 20 feet of snow a year. So like, perfect. We can go out there. We can build what we need and all of that. So they get out there. They find the spot in town. They go to build. They start building right off of a runway. And some locals came by, asked them what they were doing. They said they were building a movie and a set for a movie. And the people were like, why are you building it here, in this town? And they're like, well, because, we need snow. And they're like, yeah, it doesn't snow here. Like, what? No, it snows 20 feet a year. And they're like, no, it snows 20 feet a year, but not right here. Like this part of town doesn't get any snow because of the way like the topography was. Any snow that does fall just gets blown right away because it was this flat area. So they're like,
no,
crap. And I love stories like that of filmmaking and stuff like that shot of them all standing in the big circle when they discover the flying saucer. Was shot on the RKO Ranch in California.
Okay.
And it was like 100 degrees that day. And they're all out there in parkas. And they had to put a bunch of fake snow and stuff out there and shoot it.
Sure.
And they had this giant circular backdrop that they could use for matte paintings.
Okay.
To shoot everything on. And actually, if you're paying attention, there's a moment where you see it because when the stuff explodes, when they drop the thermite bomb, the camera pans up and you actually see the top of the like matte painting and then the sky above that. It's really silly looking. It's only for
old school volume, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Analog volume.
But yeah, like that was some of the behind the scenes stuff in making this movie, was like shooting it in California and having to truck in all the fake snow. And I love that old school Hollywood style filmmaking because it has a certain look to it. And it's so different from what Carpenter did 30 years later with his movie, which was so much more in close and intimate. And this has like just a bunch of people. They go to this research facility and there's people everywhere. There's like 30 people there, doctors, and
which is a lot closer to the short story or to the novella than the 82 movie. There's like 37 people, I think they say in the short story. I keep changing source story. It's a novella. It's 57 pages. I should know. I read it today.
So you made a comment in my Discord that when you started watching this, that you had your 1950s white guy face blindness going on.
Yeah,
like you couldn't tell
I've always had a problem watching old black and white movies. I can't tell any of the white guys apart. Like they all have the same haircuts and makeup to me. I can't tell any of these dudes apart.
They all
speak the same.
Yep. I have clips I'm going to play later, and I have one specifically in that vein that I'm going to play because it's hilarious. But Kenneth Tobey played Patrick Henry, and he had met Hawks on I think actually the movie he was shooting when he read this book. He had like a small part in it, and Hawks was like, well, I'll put you in a movie. So he did that for her. Margaret Sheridan, who plays Nikki, which there's another departure from if you've only seen John Carpenter's The Thing, this movie has not only more characters, it has women in it, which is weird.
Has more than one women.
Yeah. But she plays Nikki, and funny enough, she actually in the credits has top billing.
No kidding.
Yeah.
She had the best agent, huh?
Apparently. Also, we mentioned James Arness as the Thing. Tall guy, big tall dude, like 6'7", something like that. And I'm sure they put lifts in his boots too. So he's just this big lumbering dude.
He has to bend down as he goes through the doors and everything.
Yep, exactly. John Dirks, by the way, one of the doctors, one of the scientists, was also real tall. I noticed. And I think
the one that what was his deal? I can't remember what his science role in the movie was, but he was the real kind of stern faced guy.
Yeah,
was always had the sweater on and was standing cross armed.
Always kind of standing in the background. Robert Cornthwaite was Dr. Carrington. He's the kind of head scientist and the one that's like
the one wearing his tweed jacket all the time with the goatee.
Yes. Oh, he was so perfectly like the stereotypical scientist guy.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but that wig and goatee that he was wearing was rough. Like
you watch this and you're like, oh, this screenwriter met a professor at a college once and he just hated him so much.
He just did. And I think Cornthwaite was like mid 30s when they filmed this, but he's supposed to be playing like a 60-something-year-old.
Yeah.
And he looks like he's in his mid 30s
wearing a swimming cap.
Yeah. It was amazing. So a couple of actors that I recognize in this that I've seen in one other movie, the reporter, Scotty, Mr. Scott, is played by Douglas Spencer, and one of the military guys. So there's three main military guys that we meet right at the beginning when Scotty shows up at the base, and they're playing cards.
Yeah, they're the plane flight crew.
Yeah, it's Captain Hendry, it's the lieutenant and Lieutenant. So two lieutenants, Eddie and Ken. And Ken was played by Robert Nichols. Now, Douglas Spencer and Robert Nichols were both in a movie called This Island Earth that came out a few years later. And
I know This Island Earth because I watched MST3K, the movie.
Yes. And I see, like, I can only ever think of Robert Nichols because of Mystery Science Theater, the movie, as Weenie Man. Because he was the main character's like sidekick, and they kept calling him Weenie Man throughout the movie. And he's just the only thing I can think of. And Douglas Spencer was in that movie as the Monitor, I think was his character. So every time I watch this movie, I just think of him as Weenie Man, and it cracks me up. But yeah, this is a whole gaggle of just the same person. It's really funny to think about it in that way. It's a bunch of the same people, one guy who looks different and looks like someone clearly in stage makeup, and then a monster. And there is more than one woman, but really only one. Yeah. Because there's the nurse.
And the nurse has like a line in the movie, and the line is, this is my job, Captain. Yeah, exactly. When that guy gets hurt and she's like, this is my job.
One of the things they did, I think, if I remember correctly, there wasn't it wasn't a big military presence in the novella, right?
All scientists.
Yeah, it's all scientists, which they again did in Carpenter's movie. And I think
all scientists and a couple support guys, like, Cook, a dog guy, like Clark. Clark is there.
Okay, yeah. And in this, they have obviously the military is there, and I think that was a Howard Hawks sort of addition of like we got to have that as part.
Well,
of the
I
movie.
understand the decision to adapt the novella, and hey, we just can't. We don't have the technology to do the shape shifting. I get it. Like you got limitations. Let's work within those limitations.
Yeah.
I really don't understand the decision to not use not even a single character from the novella. Not a name.
Yeah.
Not nothing.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Very strange.
Because usually you would at least like keep some of the names, you would think. Even if you're adapting something, you tend to want to keep the name. Like they kept the name of the thing and they kept plot elements. And that's the funny thing is there was direct plot elements that are certainly a part of it, but no character names whatsoever.
Just like in the novella and in the 1982 movie, the Thing's first encounter is with the sled dogs, and it gets attacked by them and has to defend itself. Same thing. It obviously it works a little bit differently in this one because the nature of the thing is different. But yeah, some of the plot beats, they use electricity to fight it. They use fire to fight it. Like all these things they do, these bits and pieces they take. And even Dr. Carrington, he has a speech about the nature of otherworldly beings and what we can learn from them, and that's all present in the novella. Not spoken by anybody named Dr. Carrington, but it's all there. So yeah, very strange to just say I don't like any of these names.
And I could see like the military characters not having any of the names, although I probably would have, if I were adapting it, would have maybe used like McCready as one of the military folk because that sort of makes sense. But the scientists, you would think like Carrington could have easily been a Dr. Blaine, and it would have.
Yeah, he could have been Blair, or he could have been Copper, Norris, like any of these people.
Yeah. One thing, and as we go, we're going to talk a lot about the different movies. But one of the things that I thought was kind of cool was in this movie, the military presence not only is there, but they're a very positive presence, and everybody kind of does, for the most part, give them, a lot of respect and all of that. And then you get in the 82 movie, there isn't a direct military presence, but the guy who's sort of the de facto leader in it is former military, and he is not treated the same way at all. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying about Carpenter when he took on making the movie. One of the things he said was he wanted to remake it in a way that was poignant for his present time in the 80s. And just like Hawks had made it in the 50s. And in 1950s, post World War II, we looked very favorably at our military.
Absolutely.
And in the movies, we certainly did. Whereas 1982, we're post Vietnam, we're not as high on our military at that point. So it's sort of, it's an interesting thing to look at, the way that the military part of it was portrayed in both versions.
Very much. And on that same note, it's very interesting to see only 6 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the portrayal of the idea of the nuclear bomb. It's only one line or a couple of lines, but the scientists are waxing poetic about, and the scientists are almost antagonistic in this movie. It's very strange. They're always making bad decisions and getting everybody in trouble. But the scientists are waxing poetic about the importance of science and knowledge. And I think it might be Dr. Carrington. He says, we split the atom. And one of the soldiers says, and how'd that work out for us?
Right.
And it's like, wow, the military guy says that the bomb was bad.
Yeah.
It's like, how interesting. Very, very fascinating that early after. But I guess it would be that soon after that people's like idea of the bomb and the threat started to change, like, because Russia already had the bomb at that point.
Yeah.
So very interesting.
And that was where a lot of the paranoia in this movie, because it's not nearly as prominent a thing. And the paranoia in it isn't interpersonal of like them turning on each other within.
No, it's very externally.
It's very externally, which
focused.
Makes sense given the era that this was made in, when it was, the Red Scare was the big thing, and we were so worried. It was the Cold War was going on. So
Yes.
That was one of the things that the 82 movie just does so brilliantly, though, is that paranoia throughout the whole thing, to where it extends out to the audience. Really, like, you become that paranoid.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't even trust. I mean, McCready's supposed to be the POV character. And at one point you're like, wait, is McCready the thing?
Right.
Did we, while he was outside, did it happen? Like, we don't even know. You can't even trust your POV character at one point.
Because they did such a good job of having, and this movie did it too, I think, attacks happen off screen.
Yep.
And you don't see them. So now you have to fill in the blanks in a lot of that, it makes that kind of stuff more effective, because the whole thing in the greenhouse, they go into the greenhouse, and after they leave that, and Carrington like realizes something's going on inside the greenhouse and wants to set up and study and everything in there.
He posts scientists to watch.
Yeah.
Doesn't tell the military.
Yep. Does all that kind of stuff. And then we just get like a fade out, fade in, and two of his guys have been killed and hung upside down, drained of their blood in the greenhouse.
And Captain Henry tells us this, but we don't see it. Like, they open the door, the thing's in there, they push him away, they close the door, and they're like, hey, we saw some guys hanging from their feet in there.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I guess he didn't have the budget for the fake blood or something. I don't know. Or well, at this point was the motion picture code in place. Maybe they couldn't have.
Yeah, I bet you the Hays Code was going on by then too. So it was a mixture of those things, but it makes it that much more horrific because we don't get to see it. We just hear about it. In fact, the two characters they name, we never even saw. We never saw those two scientists. They just named two random people. So, and I really did like that. I forget, because I haven't watched this in a couple of years, but I forget how long into the movie it is before we see the thing. Like, it's an hour into this hour.
It's a full hour before they thaw it out.
And so much of it is just the build up to that, which I think works, because that's, for that era of film, that's the tension building, is everything leading up to. And when Carpenter came along, he's like, well, let's throw that out the window and let's get the tension ratcheting in a different way quicker.
Helicopter chase immediately.
So is the Norwegian team part of the novella? I forget. I don't think it's in it at all. Okay.
It's all at the one place. The Norwegian team doesn't even find the thing as they do in the 82 film. They describe it's actually much closer to the thing from outer space. Our main outpost finds the thing, they dig it out. And actually much closer to the novella in this one. There is a much too long scene of describing the excavation of the thing. And they describe the tools they're using and the strategy they're going to use to dig it out of the ice. It's like, okay, we're doing this.
I think, one of my notes was like, of course, it's military standard procedure to use thermite, and they just blow the hell out of the thing too. Like, you've got something trapped in the ice. All right, we'll use the thermite. And I've seen thermite. Maybe a thermite bomb does explode more, but I know like thermite itself is not an explosive reaction.
It's more of a Bernie thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a technical term.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But they did say it was a thermite bomb. So I can get away with that. I did read also that that explosion was in the movie was much larger than they had originally planned, because the guy packed all the powder in it, left it overnight, and when he came in the next day, it was damp, and so he thought it wasn't going to light, so he packed more powder in there, and then they blew it anyway, and it was huge.
Probably some singed eyebrows on set there.
Probably. There was some good effects in this. Like,
well, I tell you what, man, when there's a scene later on in the film, it's I would call it the big action scene, where they're all in the barracks and they know the thing is coming, and it busts the door open, and the lighting in it is beautiful. It kind of does this like quick fade to super darkness, and you get this nice silhouette of the thing as it busts down the door, and then it screams, and it just goes to hell immediately. like fires everywhere. There's explosions. He's grabbing people, throwing them around. I was like, this is a cool action scene. This is fun.
It's really well done.
No, it was really cool. There's fire everywhere. They set him on fire, and he goes on fire, is like pushing people around and stuff. It was really neat.
Apparently, too, the only stunt people in that scene are the guy in the suit on fire and the one throwing the kerosene on him. The rest of it were the actors.
Wow.
Which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
And certainly would not happen today.
Unless you're Tom Cruise, he would definitely be there.
Yeah, okay, he would. But the fact that they put him in just an asbestos suit with like an oxygen mask with like, I think they had 30 seconds worth of oxygen in there or something, and just lit him on fire. And not once but twice. Like they throw kerosene on him while he's on fire. It's impressive.
And I might be wrong. I felt like it was all one cut.
Yeah,
it was all a single cut, which was really cool. There's a lot of long shots in this, a lot of long cuts in this.
Yeah, which I mean, that was a style, certainly at the time, but also
it's a very theatrical style. Get everybody into frame. They all talk to each other. The camera will pan over here and people will talk. The camera will pan over there and talk. But there's not a whole lot of cuts during the conversations.
Yeah. If you notice too, though, there's no close-ups in basically the whole movie. The whole
movie it's all like
mediums and wides.
Mediums and wides, yeah.
Which was a choice they made. They didn't want to do any close-ups, and I kind of like it for this movie because it sort of does give you a little bit of a disconnect from the characters that you don't normally. Like, you don't focus on any one character at any one time, and so when action is happening, you're more focused on the monster, which is the threat. The threat in the room is where your eye is drawn in that whole action sequence because he's on fire and because it's all wide shots and you're seeing everything go on. It's like when you watch, say, a Jackie Chan action movie, the way he would always frame everything so you can see Jackie, you can see where he's going, and you can see what his antagonist in that particular shot is at all times. There's always like three.
You understand what's going on the whole time.
And in a monster movie, you need to, like, the monster should be the threat, and that's where your camera should always go. I saw this really cool breakdown of The Thing 1982 and The Thing 2011, talking about like a similar scene in both and how just the rhythm of cutting it changed how it felt. Because in Carpenter's movie, the action's going on and you see the monster the whole time, and that's what you're drawn to. And in the other one, they were paying more attention to one of the characters that gets killed in the scene. They had like a bunch of reaction shots to it, and it's sort of drawing your eye there, making the monster not really a threat anymore because we don't care about it. We're not looking at it. And I feel like that's something that Carpenter knew, and I think Hawks and Nyby knew in this, is like Super Carrot is your thing, and when he's on screen, you've got to pay attention to him.
Oh yeah, if he's in the scene, the camera's on him. For sure. And he's not in a lot of it.
No.
But when he is present in the room or in the hallway or in the corridor, wherever he is, the camera's on him. You know where he is at all times.
And so because of that, when you have other scenes where it's just characters talking about him, you are drawn into that conversation, and now you're worried at any point he could bust through that back door. And to your point, I love the way that action sequence starts because the light's going out and that silhouette, it's just a beautiful shot.
Yeah, it was. I was very impressed with that scene. It was really well done.
'Cause, older films, if you don't watch old Hollywood, you tend to think of it as being like, I don't know, not as technically sound as what we do today. Like production values weren't as good, but when you really do go back and pay attention to some of this old stuff, they knew what they were doing back then, and they had to do it differently. There were a lot of things they had to do specific ways because of limitations of the technology at the time. But it made for really interesting stuff. And I think too, to your point, the theatricality of some of it, because it, and even in the 50s, we're still only probably 20, 30 years removed from everything being on stage.
Sure.
And so it really
there's still a whole lot of influence of stage onto these films. For sure. Yeah.
It's really not until probably like late 60s, early 70s when we start to see sort of the change in film to with things like The French Connection and whatnot, where it starts to get that more gritty kind of real life feel.
Well, once you have a couple generations removed from the influence of the stage, you have people that are raised on watching movies, and now they're watching movies because they watched movies, not because they watched the stage and they want to capture that, but because they like movies, they know movies, they want to make movies.
Yeah. And I think too, like improvements in technology where the cameras get smaller, you can move them to more areas. You can shoot more on location. You're not bound to only shooting on sound stages, which a lot of a movie like this is shot on sound stages and sets that are built. And that's still done today, but the limitations of how you could do that back then were a thing. So, I'm always fascinated by that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, like music, and styling in that is very different. I know one of my early notes was like, I love the credits being in the beginning of this movie because you get to kind of sit down and settle in to the tone of the movie with the music playing and all of that. And then we go into our story, is something that you don't see as much anymore.
Right. And the thing I found almost frustrating is the difference in style of dialogue.
Okay, good.
It is very noticeably different from a modern way of putting forth dialogue. A modern style dialogue isn't really delivered like people talk. There's a room full of people, they're going to talk all over each other.
Yep.
And they do in this movie. People start talking before the last person finished their sentence, and the tone of the dialogue is interesting too, because a lot of the movie, tons of the characters like just try to make the smartest remark they can. They can make a smart joke at the end of everything, even in like where they're talking about pretty heavy stuff like trying to survive. They're just making jokes at each other the whole time.
And it goes to show that like people complain about that in modern, say, Marvel movies, that they're too quippy.
Sure.
That's not a new thing. It's been going on.
Not new at all. Like, look at that. Like, this is, it is, I tell you what, it's far more prevalent in this than in a modern Marvel movie. Like every single conversation, several characters are making jokes at each other.
Yeah.
And just a totally different style of delivering information, much closer, in fact, to the novella, especially when you get down to the science. The scientists are talking and they're explaining science to you. This is how this works. Hey, this is how we located the crash site. We used triangulation, and he explains triangulation, like radar triangulation, to the captain of a plane who should know this.
Right. I would think that's part of it, but
Yeah. And that is very much present in the novella. MacReady is explaining the tools that they use to excavate and everything. And at the same time, MacReady himself waxes poetic about the loss of the ship that could have taken man to the stars.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of glossed over just a little bit in this, where like they blow up the spaceship, because that was the other thing too, is 1950s it was the peak and the height of the flying saucer era, and everybody was looking for flying saucers, so of course that's what's in this movie.
And they say, we did it, we found a flying saucer. And
I kind of like that they have that and then they blow it up, so we don't ever actually see it, which is a little bit different. But I again, that just kind of cracked me up. Like, oh, we got a flying saucer. Nope, never mind, we don't. And
they talk about how the brass is going to react to them blowing it up.
Yeah.
They talk about a news article that came out in like the inter-service magazine. And they're like, the brass is probably going to, and they're like, there's no evidence of flying saucers. Here's the real science behind it. Nobody's actually seen a flying saucer. They're not real. And the guy's like, the brass will probably thank us for not making liars out of them.
Right. what was I going to say? Oh, I did have a note. I got to get this out before I forget about it. Kenneth Tobey, Captain Hendry, looked to me like like a morph, an in-between morph of Thomas Jane and Jim Varney.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can definitely see the Tom Jane, and then a little bit more stress on the face from Jim Varney. Yeah, for sure.
I just had to mention that because it was.
That's great. No, I definitely see it.
I love. And part of what got this conversation started for you and I was you were at the episode of Wait, You Haven't Seen That I did at Dragon Con, and I started talking about adaptation there with Borderlands.
Yep.
And one of the things I love about storytelling is how you change it from one medium to another, and how you can do multiple versions of that. And I like taking a novella like this and move, the 1950s, they make it into a movie, and it's very much a movie of the 1950s. And so the novella is different, very different from this movie. But then to take it and readapt it in the 1980s, again, it's fascinating because what do you pull from that? What are you taking from it? Carpenter was like, well, we've got this source material, but we also got this movie. There are definitely shots that Carpenter used. He kind of lifted straight from this Howard Hawks movie. And reused in his, but also adapting and changing things, because one of my comments during the Borderlands discussion was I didn't have a problem with some of the things that they had changed in making that movie, because if I want the exact same story of the Borderlands video game, I have that in the Borderlands video game. I don't need that. This novella, I like changing it because if I want the story of the novella, I'm going to read that, and it's going to unfold very differently from how you would do it in a visual medium, where you're going to show and not necessarily tell. Like you said earlier, there's a very long scene in the novella where they're describing all the tools they're going to use to get this thing out of the ice. And in this movie, they're like, right, we got axes. Well, we're not going to axe this thing out of the ice. Like there's too much ice. It's too deep. Oh yeah. By the way, there's a storm front coming in. We've got about an hour. All right, grab the thermite. Let's do this thing. Like,
which is so funny because in the novella they find the thing because one of the guys hits it with it. He's hacking away at the ice and he hits it in the head with his axe.
Oh jeez.
Literally, like that's how they. It was Barclay hit it with his copper axe. Like okay, or bronze. It's bronze. Yeah, brass. Oh, yeah. No, one of those metals, the orange ones.
Yeah. But I like that because at first you're thinking, why would you use a bomb to get something out of the ice, like blow it out of the ice? But then you realize, no, they don't have time. So now it gives us a reason to do that. And that also then sets some plot stuff in motion because the scientists, they do want to study everything. And the military guys are like, we got orders to follow and we've got procedure to follow, which kind of gets flipped later when Hendry is like, I'm not going to do what this guy is saying. Like, I'm not going to preserve Super Carrot because it's trying to kill us all. Even though the general, who had a real problem with people opening doors, I may have captured that too. But later on, Hendry's like, he's going to go against his orders, and to the point where Carrington says, not only are you disobeying orders, but you're also harming science at the same time.
Right.
Like
the military has a very interesting approach to problem solving in this too. They get the orders to not thaw it out. Right. So they stand guard, make sure nobody thaws it out. They've got it in a storage room. So they don't want to make sure it doesn't get warm. Now they're at the North Pole. They could just put it outside.
Right.
But they're like, no, let's break the windows in the storage room so it stays cold in here.
Oh, and then the genius that comes in for his rotation puts the electric blanket on top of it.
Yeah, which they set up. They set that up earlier. They talk about it 20 minutes prior, and we got him an electric blanket because for his birthday or whatever.
So it's all his fault. That guy, whichever,
absolutely.
Was it Barnes? I think it was Barnes was his name.
Yes. The goofball lieutenant.
Yeah. If he doesn't put the electric blanket on top of that thing, it never thaws out.
Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like you said, they leave it outside. But I think the dogs would have peed on it, and then it would have melted from the dog pee.
Or licked it. Yeah, something like that.
So yeah, it's just like that sets everything in motion. And then I did love all of the stuff with like, ooh, it's a vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's plant matter. It's very different.
Yep.
That's why the bullets aren't doing anything to it, which is a really interesting way to deal with how do we make this monster a real threat when we've got all this military stuff around. Oh, well, it's a plant. The bullets are not going to do anything to it because it's not an animal. It's not going to react that same way.
Well, they say it doesn't have it has no heart to shoot. It doesn't have organs that can fail.
Yeah, exactly. And it just, it doesn't bleed. It's just got sap.
Right.
But then, you get like, it's intelligent too. It's not just mindlessly killing everything. Like it at one point starts, it cuts off the gas so all the heat goes down because it just wants to freeze again. Because if it can freeze, it can survive that. So I loved that kind of stuff because again, that translated into the 82 film where the thing there was also, it was weirdly mindless, but also very intelligent because it didn't just openly attack everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It would wait and kind of pick them off one by one.
And it was very it was very scheming and patient.
Yes.
In the 1982 movie. And there's a much, I don't want to say better, but there's an explicit explanation for that in the novella, which is that it can read your mind. It's telepathic.
Right.
So you cannot plot against it. You cannot develop plans against it because it's just, it knows what people are thinking when it's nearby them. So they come up with like a blood serum test, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which like they have to inject a healthy animal with human blood over the course of several days to make it immune to that blood. And then if you inject the blood, it'll have a reaction and you can determine what's human, what's not.
Yeah.
Well, because it's telepathic, it allows that one animal that they're injecting to stay not a thing. And all other, like, there's like 75 animals. There's cows and dogs and pigs and stuff.
Sure.
Every other one becomes the thing in that time. And they have to kill all the animals.
See, I love stuff like that. But again, in a book, that works because in a book, you can take more time and have something that has to unfold over several days.
Right.
To weeks. It's sort of one of my favorite adaptations is The Lord of the Rings because Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens figured out this amazing story. And they said, okay, here's the story and here's the plot thread that we think is the most important part. And let's streamline things to that because the Lord of the Rings book takes place over decades and there's so much time. And they were like, nope, we got to cut those time frames down. And honestly, it works because it works better in a movie. Mm-hmm. In The Thing, from 1982, you can't have that take place over 4 or 5 days because you're just going to lose all your momentum. You're going to lose all that tension. Same thing here. They need to keep that tension going. So this takes place over what, like 3 days, I think? Something like that.
This one is super quick. It's 2 or 3 days. The Thing from Outer Space. And yeah, the adapting of different scenes for time is very apparent in both of these movies. There's a discussion they have in The Thing from Outer Space or The Thing from Another World that they're talking about the potential of unthawing it and its germs infecting us.
Yeah.
The War of the Worlds is very clearly in the zeitgeist at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And they're worried about, we have no resistance to its infections and all this stuff. And they kind of clip it a little bit. It's in The Thing from Another World. It's in the novella. And they kind of clip it a little bit where one person's like, it could infect us. We could die from its alien germs. And another scientist is like, I disagree. And that's basically the only dissent you get.
Yeah.
Whereas in the novella, they have the full conversation, the same thing. But the other doctor's like, no, its germs can't infect us because just like I can't catch a cold from a snake.
Yeah.
And this is way different from me than a snake.
Right.
So it's a very similar conversation they're like, hey, we can take this conversation and we can put it in the movie and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then in the 82, Blair, when he is discovering what can happen with the Thing, that it wants to get to humanity, that it wants to take over the world, basically, in the film or in the novella, they talk about, he paints this beautiful picture of, okay, look, so it can assume another form. It can assimilate it. Now it has all that biomass. So it's two things, but it's still one thing. So if those two people make it to the edge of the sea, it can take a sea lion and then it can all become sea lions and go, or maybe become one big orca and swim to South America. Right. And it's actually this whole like several paragraphs long description of how it could make its way as different animals to human civilization. And it's like, yeah, that works great when you're reading something and in your mind's eye. That would be a very boring conversation to read or to watch in 1982's The Thing. So instead they change it, and Blair is playing around with his computer, and this computer shows him like a projection of what's going to happen based on his data. And it works really great. It's super quick, and you know exactly what the threat is and why Blair goes insane like he does, just like he does in the novella.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is economy of storytelling. You don't have as much time. You need to get that point across. Both do it, but they just do it in a different way.
Got to trim the fat.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love. And that's one of the reasons why I like adapted screenplays. And I'm glad that, you know, things like the Academy Awards have their own award for adapted screenplays and original, because
it's a whole different job.
They're very different. And I won't say either one is more difficult than the other, because it's just two different ways to accomplish storytelling. But it also shows you like how much just changing a POV or a tone or a main character or whatever can change your movie, right? Like, again, Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson figured out this is Frodo's story. So while there are other characters, we have to keep following Frodo. And you trim some of the things out, losing Tom Bombadil, whatever it is, like, because you got to keep your story moving forward. In this, I feel like this movie, Thing from Another World, was the story of all of these people banding together to fight a thing. And it's a very uplifting, and we get a definitive ending. And then Carpenter said, well, this is more about the end of the world, because if this thing actually came, he was on Colbert. I remember this interview distinctly because, first of all, Colbert is a huge fan of The Thing, and asked him at one point, he's like, I don't want to know, but do you know who is a thing at the end of the movie? And Carpenter's like, sure, I absolutely do. And he goes, could you answer that question? He's like, yeah, if you send me a check, and then I will definitively answer that question for you. John Carpenter.
Oh, what a Hollywood mercenary, John Carpenter.
I love John Carpenter for that very reason. I remember reading an interview. Somebody asked him about like remakes of his movies, and he's like, I keep getting checks for him. I don't care. Do what you want. He's just gonna sit at home and smoke weed and play video games, and he's happy with that.
And make music. That's what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Hey, go for it.
But he had said, like, part of it is that his movie was about like the end of everything, the end of civilization, because if this thing came to this planet and got out, we're done. He's like,
it's part of his Apocalypse trilogy.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And that was his whole philosophy, is like, we couldn't combat this thing. And so the only way to do it, like in his movie, all of the characters that are left figure out, we can't fight this thing. We can't beat it. And we're not getting out of this alive. And they accept that fate. And in The Thing from Another World, they're not accepting that at all. They're going to fight it. Like Captain Hendry is not going down without a fight. He's going to beat this thing, because he's already done it with World War II. He's coming off the highs of that. So, you know, we're very rah-rah at that point. And that's why we get that definitive, they beat it at the end. And it's a happy ending, and everybody's fine, except for the, you know, couple of guys that were strung up and drained of all their blood in the greenhouse. But
And it's fascinating because it's two different adaptations of the same source material, and you could pull, if you read the novella, you could pull either one out of those, because both are there in the novella. In the novella, Blair, who is the biologist, campaigns for unthawing this thing, and then everything goes wrong, and he immediately is like, I am responsible for this. This thing is horrible. It could imitate anything. They very quickly find out the nature of the thing. And he's like, so I I removed all the starter engines from the airplanes before I even talked to y'all about this. And he goes insane. They lock him up, but they don't say, "Oh no, he didn't let us get out of there." One of the characters says, "Yeah, I went and checked. I was pretty sure a biologist wouldn't do the job right, so I found the reserve magnetos and I found the sleds and a couple other things." And he's like, "I destroyed those two." So they're immediately all in. They're like, "Yeah, we gotta cut this thing off, and we're gonna make our stand here, live or die. But nothing's getting out of here." Mm-hmm. So both are in there. Yeah. Both the fatalism of we got to save the world and maybe we'll all die, but we're not letting anybody else get this. And also the hey, this is us. We're going to band together and fix this. And at the end of the novella, spoilers, if you haven't read it, go read it. It's really good. It's a happy ending. They managed to beat the thing, and they're like, wow, if one bird had come in here, we might have shut ourselves off and shot whatever came in the camp. Mm-hmm. And we would have been the last humans on Earth. But both are in there, and both adaptations are faithful in their own way. And that's what's really fascinating to me is I always heard tell of The Thing from Another World as like the unfaithful adaptation. Mm-hmm. But while, yeah, I mean, the nature of the thing itself, and there's not a single character that survives the adaptation, a lot of the thematic elements are present in this, that are faithful to the novella, and a lot of things even more so faithful than 1982's The Thing.
And I think when you have something that makes a big change, like, oh, it's not a shape-shifting blue-skinned three-eyed thing, instead it's what we had the ability to make at the time, which is a knockoff Frankenstein's monster, looks like a giant carrot. Yeah. That big of a change, immediately people are going to just glom onto, well, okay, it's not faithful anymore because they made this one difference. And it's sort of, it's like, I mean, anytime you adapt or remake or cover something, you're going to make changes to it, but there's a lot of the original DNA still in it. Like Johnny Cash covering "Hurt" by Nine Inch Nails. He understood what the song was about and made it into a very different type of hurt from what Trent Reznor had.
Well, and Reznor will tell you that's the definitive version of the song.
Yeah.
At this point, he's like, he made it his own thing, and I think that's the definitive version of the song you should listen to before anything else.
And yet both are valid in their own way, and it's sort of like this, like Hawks and Nyby and who was the other screenwriter? Because it was a guy that had worked with Hawks a lot. Lederer.
He was uncredited. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Charles Lederer. They sort of understood what they could pull from this really interesting story and what they had to change in order to make it at the time. But they didn't just throw everything out and say, oh, we're just going to make something with that name. They did throw out all the character names for whatever reason. But that's fine. Like they kept a lot of the core stuff and molded it to what would be the movie that's going to do well at that time, the type of movie that's being made then, and sort of bringing their own things into it. And then Carpenter, when he gets the chance to do it, does the exact same thing, just for his era and for his sensibilities and for the type of stuff that he wants to do, including, they could now show a lot more on screen, so go for it. And it's a bummer that it was so critically panned at the time.
Yeah, I've read that Roger Ebert review many times, and I roll my eyes every single time. Roger Ebert gave the same rating to the 1982 film as he did to the 2011 sequel, and 2.5 stars, both of them.
And it's just one of those things where sometimes a film comes along that is just ahead of its time. And it's something that isn't appreciated. And I think Carpenter was a director who, he doesn't do a lot of film work anymore. He pops up occasionally and does a thing here or there, but he was, in a lot of ways, he was a very punk rock director. He did his thing.
Oh yeah.
And he just made the movie that he wanted to make. And I love that about him, but he was ahead of his time. It wasn't the era that he needed to be in to be commercially successful but yet he needed to be in the era that he was in to make the movies he made. Like his movies, he couldn't make Escape from LA in a different time. He had to make it when he did. And for Howard Hawks in the 1950s, this is the type of movie that's getting made. And this is how you adapt that story. And I think it's just fascinating to see like what you change to make it work for the big screen. And this movie did well. Like it was a fairly big hit at the time, and it was very influential. Again, Carpenter was influenced by it. I think Spielberg said he was influenced by it. Maybe I know Tarantino was both this movie and 82's The Thing.
And I imagine a lot of contemporaries were inspired by it as well, because you watch this and this is very much the archetypical, if not seminal, creature feature movie. Yeah. It has a lot of those beats of, the military comes in and there's scientists and they're explaining the science to you and they set up the creature and and it all goes to heck. And just a lot of those, when you think of the 1950s creature feature film, as made famous by the 1993 John Goodman vehicle Matinee, it is absolutely that film. It's not a B movie. It's a pretty well done movie. I got my gripes with it. And it is very much a movie of its time, but it's no, and no offense to the man himself, it's no Ed Wood film,
right?
By any stretch of the imagination.
No, it's definitely a Hollywood production, and they really go for it in it, and I love that. And then also I think the uplifting ending fits, right, and it's got that "keep watching the skies" is the final words, which. Double meaning, right? Because this is the era of UFOs. We're what, three years post Roswell? Roswell was 48, I think.
Roswell was 47, I thought.
47. Okay. So 4 years after Roswell. So the flying saucers are a big thing. And again, Cold War, the Red Scare, keep watching the skies because you don't know if the bomb's going to drop either. So I kind of liked all that sort of stuff too.
Don't worry. The military's here for you guys.
That's right. And they did, by the way, the title, calling it The Thing from Another World. So it was originally going to be called just The Thing. And they tacked on From Another World because while they were making this movie, the song The Thing became very popular.
Oh no.
And they're like, we don't want to have any confusion. So they just tacked on From Another World.
We're not with those guys.
That's not us. And I love that opening burn in of The Thing. Is so good, and Carpenter reusing that for his movie was absolutely perfect.
That was fantastic.
I did capture a little bit of audio. I got to play a couple of these because some of these are too good. So one of the things, you mentioned it, and it was very much a product of its time, and I noticed this in a lot of 1970s movies too, is the overlapping dialogue. And that's that like real quick patter. I'm going to play a clip. And then when I'm done, I have a question for you about it. Okay, so here's the clip. This is from early on in the movie.
Warm in Seattle.
They got girls there.
Without fur pants on. What about it, Captain?
How many different characters do you think were speaking in that scene?
That's 3, I think.
It is. There are 3 different people there. But if I just heard that out of context, having not seen the movie, you could convince me it was just one guy.
One person, and they just overlapped his dialogue. Yeah,
because it's
very similar delivery. They all have that kind of transatlantic accent that they've put on for the it sounds real good in the microphone when you talk with that transatlantic outfit or accent.
Yep, exactly that. Yeah, and I had to capture it. I'm like, that's 3 different people talking, and it just sounds like one guy. There's one moment where it's a slightly different voice. That's Robert Nichols' voice, Weenie Man. But outside of him, it's just crazy. I loved the general who, he's only in the beginning of the movie and then he's just mentioned after it. But he calls for Hendry to come to his office. Hendry has to walk through Anchorage, Alaska, and he walks in and you just get,
come in. Close the door.
He just opened the door. He hasn't walked through the door yet. And then the next guy that came in, he did the exact same thing. So when Hendry goes to leave, I loved this.
Yes, sir. And I'll close the door.
Just tell me what you find up there.
And I'll close the door. That's, again, to your quips and your like witty, you know, everybody's got to have a little one-liner for everybody.
Everybody's got a zinger.
Yep. I had to get this because growing up, we had a friend of my family who this was her like favorite exclamation.
Holy cat.
Until like that would happen in a movie, I'd never heard another human being say "holy cats," except for Brenda, this woman that I grew up like a mile from their house, and so I was like, "That's great, that's so good."
Stop trying to make "holy cat" happen, Scott. It's not going to happen.
Scotty was
reporters.
Great. Douglas Spencer, like he has no reason to be there, but we have a reporter. And he just tags along and he ends up getting stuck in this whole thing. And all he wants the whole time is just to be able to get his story out. Meanwhile, the whole world is ending around him and they can't get a radio signal out anyway, but he's moping about not being able to send out the story about the flying saucer.
And the military guys are always trying to get rid of him. They're like, go in the room with the women and children. You don't belong here. And he's like, did I belong in Okinawa?
He's that grizzled. He's not even a grizzled looking reporter, but he's the
he definitely he looks like a skinny nerd.
He really does.
But he's having a good time.
But he did ask the best question in the entire movie.
Just as though you're describing some form of super Karen.
Some form of super Karen. Oh, it was great. We get a little bit of a love interest in this. I mean, the character of Nikki is there as that, which is obviously not present in the Carpenter movie. And was there much of that? I don't remember it in the novella. I
do not believe there are any women in the novella.
Okay.
At least not explicitly said. Everybody's always referred to as men.
And it's not a huge plot point, but it's always simmering right there. Like there's just that known sort of relationship between Hendry and Nikki. And, you know, you get the other military guys jabbing at him about that. But I did like when they do have their one scene and he says, as they're leaving to go get a drink or whatever, well, you could tie me up if you want. And then the next scene, he's sitting in a chair with his arms tied behind his back. And I did love the exchange of,
you want another one, Pat?
Don't you think you could untie me now?
I was like, ooh, getting a little frisky there. And then
him, which is interesting because in their first scene, she's giving him sass because he got drunk and got handsy the last time they met.
Right, yeah.
But she's very clearly okay with being a little risque talking to him.
Yeah. I did also get a few things of Dr. Carrington because Robert Cornthwaite, his delivery of some of these lines is just great. Like, first of all, they're talking about how the bullets don't affect it because it's a type of vegetable. And I just like,
no, Mr. Scott, I doubt very much if it can die.
Yeah, well, I've got a whole bunch of brown plants out front of my house that would disagree with you.
Right? But
merely holes drilled into vegetable matter.
Vegetable. I will never not laugh when somebody pronounces that word.
Vegetables, Captain.
But he's the classic scientist trope of utterly fascinated by whatever the discovery is and immediately puts it on a pedestal of being better than man, being better than us, right? So
it's wiser than we are.
How does he know it's wiser than we are? He hasn't, like, he's just projecting. He's projecting so much of that.
He says, oh, it's a plant, it drinks blood, it must be a higher evolved life form. What?
Now, I know the novella does go into a lot of like higher and lower life form things when talking about freezing, right? There's the whole
It does. It
discussion.
says like a fish can survive freezing and unfreezing because it's a lower life form. And I was like, what? But even later on in that conversation, one of the other scientists is like, that's not really true. It's still dead. It's just some of the cells come back to life. That's it.
Yeah.
But they discover that basically every cell of the thing, just like in the 82 movie, is its own independent organism. So all it takes is a cell to come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it only needs the one. But yeah, he's got a bunch of lines like,
This is an enemy right here.
There are no enemies in science, Professor. Only phenomena to study.
there are no enemies in science.
Which is a really interesting thing to say in 1951, just 6 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
Right. But the classic smug hubristic science man.
Yeah.
Knowledge at any cost.
Oh yeah. In fact, even so much as
Knowledge is more important than life, Captain. We've only one excuse for existing: to think, to find out, to learn.
Knowledge is more important than life, Captain. And Captain Hendry's like, the hell it is. I mean,
you got to get the military in there so that they have that respect for life in there, because scientists, these guys don't respect life.
And it really tells you like what the temperature of the world was at the time, right? Because it is post World War II and the bomb dropping. So we are going to look at scientists a little bit sideways now because they led to that.
They made that thing.
Whereas, the military won the war and saved us. But then fast forward a couple of decades, coming off of Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. And now, like, especially in the US, we were looking at the military very differently. That's where you get First Blood, Rambo. The first Rambo movie is it's very different from the rest of those movies.
Absolutely. Because it's really, really good.
There's that.
Among other things.
But so to have just a very, very different way that like science and the military are portrayed in these two different adaptations of the same thing is really cool.
You never get any movies, making fun of the scientists or coming down on the scientists who made Agent Orange.
That's true.
They just got let off the hook. What's the deal?
No, it's just I love seeing the different ways that stories get told. Because again, if you took the novella and you adapted it into like a radio drama, you're going to do it in a different way than you would a film, because you're not seeing the thing. That was one of my favorite adaptation type things is Douglas Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide, because he was from the original radio play to the film with Martin Freeman in it. Douglas Adams was involved in every adaptation of that story.
Oh, and you can see it because it's still Douglas Adams through and through.
Yeah, but he would change a little something every time. So he makes it from a radio drama to a novel, changes a little bit, from the novel to the TV series, and then from the TV series to the video game. And, he would do these little things because it was never the same exact thing every time. It was the same story.
New jokes, new tweaks.
Yeah.
Always something new to get.
And that's storytelling. That's what you should be doing. Like Mike Flanagan is really good at adapting, say, Stephen King, because he understands him. Like if I see Mike Flanagan or Frank Darabont attached to something written by Stephen King, I'm all in. Because Frank Darabont, Shawshank Redemption, The Mist, The Green Mile, like the guy understood how to adapt it. Flanagan does the same thing. He gets how to take something from the written page and turn it into visual without just doing the same thing, but still getting those same feelings across. And that's not easy to do. It's really not. As somebody who has tried in the past to adapt stories, it's hard.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a lot of work involved in that. And I'm seeing some friends of mine do it right now with Aquillow, because they're taking Aquillow from an audio podcast into a written novel. And eventually that will become an audio book, which would be different from the podcast.
Yep. So we had some fun with them the other night. Were you there?
I was there for part of that. Yeah. But it's just
Jeff DM'd a story for us.
Yeah, it's just cool to see, like, the way that stories evolve and change, and in different eras too. Taking a Lovecraft story that was written in the early 1900s and adapting it today. There's a lot of things you're going to change for that, to fit the time. Do you have kind of maybe not a favorite, but maybe like, when you think of good adaptations, does anything jump to mind to you right away?
Ooh, I'd have to think about it a little bit more. I think after having finally read the novella Who Goes There, I think the thing 1982 is a fantastic adaptation, and I don't think that the thing from Another World deserves some of the malignment it gets as a poor adaptation. I think in a lot of thematic ways, it's really very apt as an adaptation, and it hits a couple of things where 1982 thing just kind of gets out.
Yeah.
The Green Mile is fantastic.
Yeah.
It really is. I loved the novel before they made the movie, and it's really a great adaptation. One really interesting adaptation that is just very, very, very different from the novel is Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
They changed a ton of stuff from the novel to the film, and I got to tell you, I mean, the film's better for it. It really masterful adaptation work, understanding how the audience is going to relate to your main character and changing things so that we don't lose what we want our audience to feel about Forrest Gump himself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too the thing with adaptation that is important is keeping the feel and the tone of something without just retelling it. Like you can tell the same story, you can tell the same story beats, but it shouldn't just be a one-to-one page to screen or page to game or whatever you're doing. You need to evolve and change it as you go, but also keep the basis behind it.
Yes.
One of the things, I don't look at it as a straight remake, but The Crow that came out this year with Bill Skarsgård is a retelling of that story, but it's kind of also not. They didn't just take the story from the Brandon Lee movie and adapt it, or and retell it. They also didn't just take the story of the original comic and retell it. They built their own thing. My problem with it was some execution stuff, because they kind of missed what made that comic, and then by extension that 1994 movie, kind of work for the story. They missed that. There was like some of the seasoning involved in it wasn't quite there. So they learned, they took the wrong lessons from other things and put them in.
But you know what? Like, respect to them for swinging at their own ball. Because I mean, just remaking the Brandon Lee movie, we got that. We have that one.
Yeah. Also,
we have it.
An impossible task, right? It's like, Ghostbusters in 2016, they couldn't just do what they did in 1984. They had to do something different, and not just having it be all women. Like that's not it. They also had to change sort of how they came about and sort of what they were doing there. I look at like Michael Crichton adaptations, right? Michael Crichton put so much into his novels that is technical. And then when you put that on screen, you can't have the first couple of chapters of Jurassic Park don't translate to a movie.
I will never forgive him though for renaming Deinonychus as velociraptors, because I know what a velociraptor is, and it's not that. That's a Deinonychus.
Yeah,
but that's okay. That's okay, Michael. I know you were an MD, not a paleontologist. It's fine.
But yeah, like you look at some of his, because there's been great adaptations because they figured out what to do. Spielberg knew what to hew from Jurassic Park and put it into a movie that was not the same story as the book, but also very similar. And then you look at other Crichton adaptations like Sphere. For me, I love the novel Sphere. And the movie tried to be too close to exactly what the novel was, and it didn't translate the same way. The changes that they did have to make didn't work, and they didn't make enough changes to it to make it more cinematic.
Sphere was very disappointing to me as a little 12-year-old Steve who had just read the novel.
Right. Same. Exactly.
But the best Crichton adaptation is The 13th Warrior.
I love that one.
It's also a fantastic D&D movie if you look at it through that lens.
It is.
It is. All the different guys are different classes.
Yeah, that was one I did for this show. I got my friend Corey to watch it, and I will sing the praises of that movie. I think it's really underrated. Like, it's not
I adore the
perfect,
13th Warrior.
but it's such a fun movie, and it has one of my favorite versions of a character figuring out how to communicate.
Oh yeah, when he learns the language around the fire, it's really well done, I think.
McTiernan was good at visually showing that too, because he did a similar visual trick in Hunt for Red October with the push in on the mouth, and then the language changes and then he pulls back.
I would have liked the whole movie of Sean Connery speaking Russian though. Dang,
pretty good. Russian with the most Scottish sounding Russian. Oh, sorry, Lithuanian. He's Lithuanian by birth.
That's right. Hey, he immigrated. Okay,
that's true. But yeah, just the way stuff gets adapted is cool, and we're kind of in a bit of a golden age of adaptation too, because we're seeing stuff now with some of these prestige TV series where they're taking stories and able to adapt them. Condensing a story down into a movie, if it's not written as a movie, can be tough, especially if it's something that's really well liked, right? Because as you said, you got to trim the fat. Right. But sometimes the fat is the stuff people want to see.
Yes.
You know? Tom Bombadil, people want Tom Bombadil, but do you really? I mean, you don't want him in that movie because it's not going to work.
No.
But you like that character. But if you do something in a longer form, you can take that side road and go for it. Yep. Flanagan's on my brain because I watched a lot of his stuff this year. That I had missed, Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, that kind of stuff.
Both fantastic.
It's amazing. And the way he takes and adapts things, all the stuff with the Fall of the House of Usher series that he's doing, or that he did, I'm in the middle of that right now. And it's amazing because he's taking these stories and weaving one story out of all of them while pulling all this different stuff from Edgar Allan Poe. I love that kind of stuff. I just have to tip my cap to anybody that's doing these kinds of adaptations because it's not easy to do, even as somebody who's done a little bit of it in D&D campaigns and trying. It ends up being a lot of what I do is finding something, type of story that I like, and then trying to mold it into the campaign. You guys do that with Botched a lot, like.
Oh yes, Dennis. The last 2 seasons, he's been adapting the SCP online fiction universe for us, and he's been doing a fantastic job of it. And it's really interesting because it is as much as some Australians will accuse us, you know who you are, of fake roles and fake improv. It's all improv. We all, like, Dennis writes the stories. We don't know any of it beforehand. It's all character based decisions. But how close we come to some of the actual stories. He's like, y'all basically did the story, and like, we don't know this stuff, but apparently I think that speaks to the quality of the writing of the stories, is that, they think about what humans will do in these situations. But we're absolutely in a golden age of adaptations. We're in another golden age of television. And we're seeing adaptations of media of a quality we haven't seen before, especially in the realm of video games.
Yeah.
You had The Last of Us come out last year, or was it the year before, with Pedro Pascal. Just fantastic adaptation of the game. And now it looks like we'll be getting an adaptation of the God of War Norse era, the last 2 God of War games. And Ronald, they had a few different guys attached to it. They had the guy that did the Wheel of Time series attached to it, and I was so worried.
Yeah.
And they fired everybody, and they're starting from scratch. Ronald Moore's now attached to it.
Oh, okay.
Battlestar Galactica reboot. So we'll see.
I mean, part of what makes these adaptations of some of the video game things working now is that we've got video games from the last 20 years that had better stories. Like,
absolutely,
the Super Mario Brothers movie from the early 90s.
People blame that as like, there wasn't a story.
There's no story to tell, and they bring in a pair of directors who don't know the property at all. So they just like, hey, make this movie. Here's some of your notes. Like, this is what needs to be in it. And so that's what you're going to get. But having story to adapt makes a difference. And
absolutely,
you look at comic book adaptations into film and how long that took to really consistently be good. Like, we had Superman and we had Batman 89, And those were good, but there were a lot of bad adaptations because it was people that didn't grow up with the material, didn't know how to adapt it cinematically.
They hire a studio writer, like, here, adapt this. Okay, here you go.
Exactly. And you get a studio director that maybe is just for hire. But you're starting because you get the people that grow up with it. And I mean, that again, I know I talk about it way too much, but like Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson being such a fan of that was what fueled him to be able to adapt it the way that he wanted, because he knew what he wanted to do with it and how he wanted to do it. So, well,
in the same way, Avengers 2012 is such a fantastic movie because Joss Whedon grew up reading comic books and he loves the material.
Yeah. Yep.
And you get directors and that directors and writers and actors that love this source material and want to be these people, and it shows in the it shows in the production. It shows.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing with like video games that we're getting now. I've been playing Alan Wake 2, which is fantastic. And you can tell, like, the people that were writing that and coming up with it, there was a lot of Twin Peaks that they watched. And it comes through in the games. And that's great. Like, I just love these taking of story elements and moving them from one medium to another, getting us something more interactive. And then maybe doing a book based off of that or whatever. Like, novelizations of movies fascinate me to no end, because it's such a weird idea to, like, we made this movie, especially when it's a novelization of a movie that's based on a novel. That one is the one that kind of makes my brain churn a little bit.
I prefer junior novelizations. I read the junior novelization of Jurassic Park. As I was 10 or 11. Sure. But I had already read Jurassic Park, and then I watched the movie, and then I read the junior novelization. I was like, this sucks. This is bad.
So we mentioned Botched, but let people know about Botched Podcast, because it's really cool.
Absolutely. I am a member of Botched, a D&D SCP podcast at this point. We've got several seasons available on your favorite podcatcher, Botched Podcast. But currently we are doing our second SCP season set in the distant past of 1953. And it's focusing on the formation of our version of the SCP Foundation. It's got a lot of Monster of the Week stuff, a lot of Cold War intrigue, and a whole lot of very salacious jokes. We have a great time. You can find us on Botched Podcast, TikTok, YouTube, any podcatcher, and right here on Twitch. You can also find me, HewhoisSteve, on TikTok and YouTube. Haven't produced a lot of videos lately, but if you like film, if you like writing, I've got several different videos on YouTube. I've got an hour-long critique of the action in The Mandalorian Season 2 that I spent 6 months researching and writing. Wow. And I've got a couple on the writing of the God of War franchise, which I adore.
Excellent. Definitely check those out. HewhoisSteve and the Botched Podcast. Awesome.
Yeah.
Steve, thanks so much for being here. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. Thanks. Yeah, I'm always have a great time on your show, man. I'll always be happy to come back. Thank you for having me. I'm glad we were able to have this discussion because I had a great time at your show at Dragon Con. We started talking about adaptation, and I've been excited to do this show ever since.
Same. It's been in my head since we mentioned it there, and so this was fun to finally get to do. Now next week, I'm going back in time a little bit. We have finished Spooky Month, but I'm doing another horror movie because my friend Tom Norman has never seen a single Friday the 13th movie, ever, any of them.
Wow.
So I asked him if he wanted to, and he said yes. And I said, okay, we'll go back. We're going to watch the first one. So we're watching the original 1980 Friday the 13th.
He never even saw Jason Takes New York.
No. Jason Takes
It was
Manhattan
on TBS all the time.
I know. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. It's always fun to introduce somebody to something like this so far, especially something like Friday the 13th. That's such a part culturally of just everything. And it's so well known and memed and made fun of and parodied that it's really interesting to then have somebody watch it and see what the reaction is to it so far later. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's what's coming up next week, Friday the 13th. So as we move along, and I get closer and closer to my 300th episode of this show.
So close, man. This is 293.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
And if you like this show and want to watch it live, you can do that Sunday nights at twitch.tv/tvstravis or on YouTube at youtube.com/@tvstravis. I do it live there. Show comes out on Wednesdays. And if you want to be part of the Patreon and keep the show going, you can do that at patreon.com/WYHS. Does help the show continue and let me do things like going to Dragon Con and doing the show live there, which was a ton of fun this year. And I'm already lining up to do it again in 2025. And I've got some other potential, hopefully, live shows I want to do in the coming year as well. The Patreon helps me to be able to do those. So if you can do that, it's great. You also get things like monthly movie night. I'm bringing those back. So we go through the back catalog of this show, find a movie that folks haven't seen, maybe patrons haven't seen, and we watch that. Or maybe they just want to watch it again. That works too. And I've got new content exclusive to patrons for my first watch through of these mini series that I've been doing. So I'm in Fall of the House of Usher, and I'm doing episode by episode reactions to this stuff, and patrons get to hear that. I may eventually release it for everybody, but it'll be down the road. So if you want to get that earlier, Patreon is the way to go. But until next week and Friday the 13th, Steve, once again, thank you so much. We'll do this again. We'll find something else. We got to find something I haven't seen that you love. And
heck yeah,
we'll talk about that. And until next week, just remember to enjoy your movies. And it's getting cold. Let's be excellent to each other. It's been Wait You Haven't Seen.
What did you say the number of that bulletin was?
629-49, item 6700, extract 75,131.
Oh, that one.
Oh, how many takes do you think they did of that? Because if I'm the director, I'm making them do like at least 5 of those.
Oh yeah,
at least
do it again, faster, more feeling.
Exactly, faster, more intense.